welcome to this video. Today we're going to be having a quick look at a basic configuration for a MikroTik. This is from fairly basic knowledge or no knowledge at all to getting a basic setup for a home router or an office, small business, small office. We'll go through some entry-level steps for initial connection, firmware upgrades, best practices / my personal preferences. So hopefully this should be enough information to you then to delve deeper into the exciting world of MikroTik. So for the demonstration, I've just got a MikroTik HAP AX2. Still a fairly modern unit. It's great for a home network. It's got AX, so Wi-Fi 6 on it, which provides decent coverage. It's gigabit ports, and it's not a bad looking device either. So we're going to go through steps for, like I mentioned, initial management access, how to get onto the device, and removal of the default config and explanations as to why. Going through the firmware upgrade process. We'll then look at setting up the LAN, the WAN, the DHCP, DNS and Firewall. Again, very basic settings. The LAN is just going to be a simple 192 range. The WAN is going to be provided by my development network. So it's just we're going to put a DHCP client on that WAN interface, and then we'll set up a DHCP server, DNS server, and then we'll just configure the basic firewall to allow us to route all our traffic and also protect us a bit. And then the last steps we're going to do is the Wi-Fi, and again that's a bit more tricky when it comes to MikroTik, but hopefully the guide will give you enough information. Those of you that have used an older model, this has changed somewhat since the introduction of both router S7 and also AX. So there would be more videos for legacy stuff on that, as well as if you've ever deployed Capsman, you might find that a bit more familiar. So let's jump into it then. Okay, so let's get going. Here we have this machine here. Just has I've got two connections. One is connected to my management network, so I can remote desktop to it, and the second is with a USB connection, which is connected to the MikroTik HAP that we will be using for this demo. But this has no gateway on it, so all traffic will eventually route out via the MikroTik once we've got it up and running. Just a bit of background there. So we're going to start off. This is going to be very basic. This is going to be starting from scratch for those who are very new to MikroTik. It will be a more technical approach than, say, using the app, which they do have, and they do have some default config on there. The idea is that you can buy a MikroTik out of the box. You can plug it into your home connection, providing you get DHCP from your ISP. And using the default SSIDs and networks, it should just be set up as a home router. However, if you're watching this video, you're probably somewhat technical, if not more technical. So it will be slightly, although it will be a very basic high level from the beginning. So for those who are new to MikroTik but want to know more, to touch on some more of the technical aspects of it. I hope that's clear. I just want to set the scene. I've been using MikroTik for many years now, and I'm a big fan, as you can probably tell. I've used it both professionally, and I use it. My whole house runs off it. I'm always playing with it. I find it incredibly versatile. The price point compared to others out there for what it does is I can't think you can't beat it. For home appliances, I guess the only other option would be Ubiquity, but then when you compare those two prices, they're very different. I just think it's a good place to either to learn more about networking from a general high level, or if you just want to improve your own network or you've got a particular need, I think MikroTik slots in pretty well to most use cases. Okay, so let's get going. So out of the box, there's two ways of configuring MikroTik. Well, three. I guess you've got the CLI, which you can SSH into. You've got the web fig, as they call it, which we can look at here. If we go to so this is what happens if you hit the web page. This is its default IP, which will always be configured by default. Password is, so the password used to be admin and then no password. However, recently they've changed this so that it is actually printed on the device itself, on the sticker underneath, which has the SSID keys as well for the device, serial number and all the rest of it, which I'll bring up with a photo just here. Okay, and as we can see, our password is Y4 6 0. There we go. Okay, and by default, it wants us to change the password. Can cancel. Okay, so this is WebFig. It's basically you can imagine a web page of the other configuration option, of which is the Winbox, which we'll go into in a second. But it always starts with this quick set, and again, this is to make it easy, I guess, for people that aren't particularly as tech savvy as some others. But I've always found it to be not reliable, a bit clunky, and so I'm not a fan. So I always advocate don't use WebFig. So for that reason, we will close this now and then move on to the more preferred option, which is Winbox. So Winbox is a really light executable application which runs on Windows. There is a newer version, a beta version, which now runs on Linux. As before this, to run this on Linux, you'd have to do all sorts using emulators, and yeah, it was always a bit tricky. But now this is just lightweight. You download the executable file and you just run it basically. And then what it'll do is it will discover its neighbors, which it does via layer 2. So it'll pick up anything on the network. So this is the one here. This is the one we're going to be looking at, and this is my development side. So I've just got my router and my access point. So we can connect either via MAC address on layer 2. So if we're on that same network, which we are because we're directly plugged into it, or by its IP, providing that we're on this IP address. So we'll go ahead and jump in using the MAC address for now. One thing to mention as well, I will be jumping back and forth as I remember things, but the out of the box, the MikroTik itself, the way it's configured, it won't allow MAC address connection via what is designated as the WAN port. So out of all of it, there'll be, when we look for the default configuration, there'll be a bridge which will be for the LAN. That will have ports normally 2 to 5 in, depending on your model. This is a HAP, so all the HAPs have 5 ports. So one will be designated for the internet, and that will have a DHCP client on it, which the idea is you plug your ISP into that port, and then you plug your devices into 1 to 5. And for security, they obviously don't allow MAC address connection. So the Winbox discovery is disabled on that port. So if you plug it into port 1, you'll probably find that you won't see it on here. And in fact, you won't even get an IP address because it's not giving out IP addresses because the DHCP server doesn't exist on that port. So yeah, first out of the box, plug it into port 2, 3, 4, or 5. So for me, I've got it in port 2. Log in, either via MAC address or IP. I always do MAC address because it is irrelevant because we'll be removing that default config, but it does mean that we will when we remove the IP address settings, we won't get kicked off, but then we will, because technically the MAC address I'm using now is for the bridge that's created, not for the port itself. So now we're in. So you always be greeted with this first page, which is basically showing you what it's got configured by default. Now, normally my first thing I do is remove the configuration. So the configuration on here is what MikroTik deem as being, the basic setup that you need. But they don't know best. Not through their fault, but I mean, they can't anticipate everyone's needs. So chances are what your needs are will be different to someone else's. So without finding you, when you come to configure stuff later on, that you're getting problems because you're getting random IP addresses assigned from somewhere and you find out you've got a DHCP server running still. You can't add ports to a different bridge because they're already inside a bridge. So I always would just remove it. But I will just, before we do that, I'll just click OK for now. Again, it's going to ask you to change password here, which we can cancel for now. Just mentioning the default. So here we have the bridge, which has ports 2 to 5 in and both Wi-Fi interfaces. We look at IP DHCP client. Here we have WAN 1 has a client on it ready to receive an IP address from the ISP, which will also give you its gateway and use the DNS from the peer. And then if we go to IP neighbors, discovery settings, so interface only is LAN, which again, if we go to interfaces, interface lists, here we have LAN, which the only interface in that is the bridge, which I showed you at the very beginning. So going back to what I mentioned, you will only discover via Winbox any neighbors on ports 2 to 5. Hope that makes sense. So let's reboot this, and I will we'll go back to what I wanted to show you initially. So this time we will reset. Okay, now we've reset our device. This time we're going to click remove configuration. And what's going to happen now is we'll probably lose access to the device, because before that MAC address I'm connecting to would have been on the bridge. There we go. We've lost it. So now we cancel that. As you can see, I was on B4 at the end. I'll refresh. Okay, so I'm still on B4, so with the MAC address of the port. There we go. And also, one thing to note, when you reset the configuration, we actually lose the default password, so it's now blank. Okay, so now this is Winbox. You can see we've got nothing configured other than what's physically on the devices. The Wi-Fi comes disabled by default. But the first thing we'll do is download the latest version of firmware. Okay, I just had to re-enable my internet access because otherwise I wouldn't have been able to get to the MikroTik website to demonstrate this part. So go to mikrotik.com, and again, another plus point of MikroTik is the licensing that comes with the device. Is all the licensing you need. You don't have to purchase additional to get support or download software. Like some of the vendors, you need to have a support license in order to get software. It's pretty worth mentioning. This is where you get Winbox from. So down under the software and downloads, this is the classic or the original Winbox. This is the beta version I was mentioning. So now, in order to get the latest version of firmware, what we need to do is we need to see firstly what we're on. So we're on version 7 and we're on 7.12.1. We're going to go to the latest stable, which is 16.2. But to know which one to download, up here, as you can see, the architecture is ARM64. So we just need to find ARM64, which is this one here. and we want to get the main package stable. That will just download. Okay, well that's downloaded. I'll just put that on the desktop. Here it is. And now to get it onto the MikroTik, you simply drag and drop. Couldn't be easier. I'll just copy that across. Okay, and then here it is here. So it's the package 7.16.2, and it's the ARM64 version, which is correct. Now to upgrade this, all we then do is have to hit system reboot. Nothing more than that. And then that will just reboot and apply the new firmware. Now one thing to mention is if you were to put this on here and then shut the thing down and then plug it in again, when it boots up, it won't apply the firmware. You have to actually do the system reboot for it to trigger the firmware upgrade. Otherwise, it'll just boot back up in the same version with that file still in the file directory. Because, yeah, if you wanted to deploy multiple MikroTiks, you thought, oh, I'm going to, as zero touch as possible, I'm just going to put firmware files on them and send them to site. So when they boot, they'll be on the right firmware. Yeah, that wouldn't happen. It's just an FYI there for you. Okay, and there we go, in already. As we can see now, 7.16.2. That's our firmware done. This change password thing here is going to come up every time we log in until we change it, so we might as well just set that now. Done. Okay. Right, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to sort out our networking side. Oh. Okay, I'll kick this off. Go back in. Okay. Right, as I was saying, we'll sort our networking side out first. So we're going to create our bridge. So a lot of this config will mimic of what was defaulted on here. So give it a name, LAN bridge. Call it what you like, doesn't really matter. We're going to add all our same ports as would have been in the default one too. Okay, that's because I'm connected to port 2, which is why it's just kicked me off. We establish the connection on the bridge. Okay, let's carry on adding those ports. 3, 4, and 5. There we go. We're also going to add our Wi-Fi ones. Okay. Right. Now we can give these an IP address. Okay, cool. We're going to use 192.168.0.1/24 for the LAN side. So we'll put that on the LAN bridge. Don't need to fill out the network because when we hit apply, it will propagate that for us. There we go. And the IP address for the IP address for what we're going to use for the WAN, which will be Ether1, again as it was by default. We again will just put a DHCP client on because that's how it's going to get an IP from my network, and you can leave these as default. However, your ISP may use PPPoE, which again would be a bit more in-depth configuration. So not really covered in this video because I don't want to go into all the options because we could be here all night. But yeah, you could just then, otherwise, if we had a static IP address, you would then just put it in here, select on Ether 1. Okay, that's our client done. Now we're going to create, now we've got our IP range for our LAN. Let's give it a DHCP server. So for this, as much as I'm not a fan of using wizards, when it comes to creating a DHCP server, this is by far the easiest option. You basically hit DHCP setup, you select the interface, providing you've already given an IP address, it will then pull that information into here. So that's our network. This is the gateway, which is the IP address of that LAN bridge. This is where the range is. I would like to just start from 20 and decrease to 200. The other thing, which I don't know if it's a quirk or what, normally in my experience DHCP servers dish out from the lowest number, whereas MikroTik starts at 200 and we'll go backwards. DNS, we're just going to give it, in fact we'll give it the IP address of the bridge as well, and I will demonstrate that DNS feature as well. Oops, one thing I meant to change was the least time, sorry, from 30 minutes, I like to give it much higher than that, so 8 hours. Okay, and what that's now done is it's created our server, it's created the networks, and then it will also have created the IP pool set, which is that range it gives out. So otherwise you'd have to create all three of those separately. So using that DHCP setup is a winner there. Okay, so and then we go to IP DNS. Sorry, not firewall, IP DNS. Okay, so it can dynamically get the servers, which it will do from our upstream. We can give it our own here. But in order for our then LAN clients, or our other devices that are going to connect via this MikroTik, you need to select allow remote requests. So what that means is that the PC, the phone, or whatever it is that plugs into the MikroTik, it gets an IP range from the DHCP server of 192.168.0. something. Its DNS server is going to be the same as the gateway, which is going to be this MikroTik. So when you want to browse to the internet, you make a DNS request, it's going to make it a request onto the MikroTik. Then the MikroTik will then use its own server, which is configured here, or a dynamic one, which you'll see in here once you get one from your ISP or upstream network. But it will also cache them here. So if you're Googling something constantly and you having to resolve google.com every time, it will cache it on obviously your own device as well, but it also do it here. And this also means then you can create static entries if you wanted this. Again, it's probably getting into a bit more detail than is needed, but if you were to run local devices and you wanted to run your own DNS entries, you would do it via here. So it will make the request to the MikroTik first, and then the MikroTik then will make the request onwards to your upstream server. Okay, so that's our LAN side pretty much done. Our WAN we'll get from our upstream DHCP client. So the next thing we're going to tackle is the firewall. So let's go IP firewall. Now let's start with NAT. So our NAT is basically going to translate all our internal IP addresses behind the outbound IP, which is going to be the IP address that's given to Ether 1 from our upstream connection. So we want to basically say that anything, so the chain is source NAT. Again, we won't go into all the differences here in this video. So the default is source NAT, we leave that as it is. The out interface is going to be Ether 1 because the traffic is going to be routed out of that interface. And then our action is just masquerade. So anyone that's from a Cisco background, you basically do your NATing overload. So you basically NAT over behind this the outbound IP, but here it's called masquerade because basically it changes your IP to be the WAN IP essentially, and that's, if you know about NAT or not, that's how you basically route across the internet in IPv4 world. So that's all you need to do for that. Now filter rules, these I think are very important. People may leave these blank. I certainly wouldn't advise it because basically what this is your preventing of any malicious interaction. My USB Ethernet adapter is a bit unhappy. There we go. So basically this is your defense against anything malicious happening from outside. So again, we have the chains here. Again, I won't go into too much detail what they are, but essentially forward chain is anything passing through the router, so LAN to WAN. Input is anything happening to the router itself. So that's the one we're going to look at now. So any traffic outside of the router and it's trying to access an IP address on the router itself, we would use the input chain. So firstly, we're going to create input, and we're going to create an allow rule, which would be anything, on an address list we need, So anything coming from our internal traffic. So anything from our network. So when we're on our internal network on the MikroTik, and we want to make changes to this MikroTik, we're going to hit it on its IP address. So we want it to be allowed from there. However, another way of doing this is using this address list feature, which is still under the firewall, and then we call this allowed hosts, for example, and then we give it the IP, the subnet. There we go. And now under this section, source list, we can now see allowed hosts. Now what this means is later on down the line we want to remotely access our MikroTik because it gets a public IP address from our ISP, but we don't want to allow that from everywhere on the internet, and we have a VPN server that we use, or a work location that has a static IP address or another location, and we know those IP addresses. We can then add them in here, and anything in those, basically it's an access control list, will allow access to our MikroTik. However, if you didn't want that, you literally just have this one IP, and you could put it in here, but even if you've got the one IP, I still like to do it this way because it just makes it a bit more flexible. And we would be coming from Ether 1. In fact, no, we'll be coming from everywhere, so we'll leave that as it is. And then action accept. And there we go. So some vendors, some firewalls, they will have an explicit deny rule by default, which you can't delete or remove, which basically means it blocks everything. And then what you want it to allow you, basically, it's a wall, a firewall, and you want to allow certain things. You poke holes in that wall to allow certain traffic in. So, but with MikroTik it doesn't have that, so we have to build that as well. But it's important that we build our allow rule first. If we put our deny rule in, chances are we could then lose connection to it. So again, we're going to get input, and now one thing we're going to add is this connection state. So in the MikroTik, you'll often see these little boxes next to certain things, which if we click in, you get an exclamation mark, and that means not, so it's negative. So if we tick established traffic, so basically when you want to make a DNS request, when you want to make an NTP request from the MikroTik itself, it's going to send out a request to NTP, and it's going to come back on that port. But if you didn't have this allowed, it would then get dropped, so you wouldn't get any updated time, you wouldn't get any DNS requests come back. Whereas if it's got an established connection out, it'll allow that back in. So we could put that, untick that, and then just have that as accept. But just for neatness, I like to have this be in the deny rule. So it's going to block everything except for established traffic. And then again, this time we just drop. So anything coming in that's not already had a connection out is going to get dropped. And there we go. So now we are protected from the malicious people out there which might try and access our device. We've got our NAT all set up. Okay, so we're almost there. We've almost got, we're all up and running. One more point of interest. We've got a system here we can mention in the NTP. So we can run an NTP server and NTP client. The NTP client is what's going to get our time for us. So I'm going to just use a generic URL, which, because I'm in Australia, that will get the time from a. This is obviously resolved to different IP addresses depending on every time you hit it. So it just means that our router will get its time. Obviously that's not going to get anything at the moment because I haven't got internet access. And then to see the time, you can just add time, add date, and then you can add other statistics about the device itself, uptime, which is just useful to have. So as you can see, we're back in 1970 at the moment. Okay, so the last thing we probably need to do now is the Wi-Fi. Now, this has changed a bit in recent years. Firstly, since the router OS version 6 up to now version 7. But also there's this used to say wireless up here, and that was for the older network interfaces. It's the different radios they had for the older technologies. So for the ends, ACs. However, now it's Wi-Fi, as you can see. The other thing is gone now is that there used to be a Capsman. Used to be configured in here. However, that's now changed. So I've got an article which I'll link in the description, which goes into more detail about this. But basically, if you find yourself this device I'm using now, I purchased quite a while ago, even though it's AX, and it had an older version of the firmware on it, which since upgrading, I had to. I'll show you the system packages. I had to install this Wi-Fi QCOM in order for it to work, due to the fact this has got AX interfaces on this newer firmware. So again, that goes into a bit more detail in the article I've been put together to explain this. But simply put, if you try and configure this and you find that you're not propagating it, if you follow what I'm just going to show you now and you find you're still not seeing any of the SSIDs, then chances are you need to check that out. So yeah, let's get going. The other thing that's not back to front, that has changed is in the older version, when you had a dual radio, so you had 2.4 and 5 in the same device. 2.4 was the first, so it was often Wi-Fi 1 or wireless 1 adapter, and then 2 was the 5 gig. Now it's the other way around, so this one is in fact the 5G one. And just to double check that, when you open this up, if you head to channel and you change frequency, sorry. Ooh. If you select band, you can see here it'll only give you the option for 5 gig. And likewise, if we now look at Wi-Fi 2, again, just 2.4 on here. So yeah, let's get going. So this time, before we used to configure everything directly on the interfaces themselves, sorry. And anyone that's familiar with Capsman will know that you basically build your configuration and apply that to your interfaces as they come online, so your APs that you connect. So it's a similar sort of process to that. So you can just like before, we could just go through here and configure all these, but let's stick to the new way. So let's start with security. And I may have mentioned before, when within these menus, this the very first tab, if you like, for the main configuration, often takes configuration from these other tabs. But it's often easier to work right to left. So for us, we're going to start at security, and that will become clear in a minute. So we'll just call this security 1. Authentication types, we're going to go WPA2 PSK. Encryption, CCMP 256 will do. Give it a passphrase. Hello world 123. Another thing, as you can see at the moment, this is in plain text. You can read what I'm typing here. That's because I've unchecked this. By default, this is checked. If I check it, there you go. So you can't see. So if obviously you would have that checked if you were in some way someone else was viewing your screen. But at any point you can uncheck that. So if you ever type a password in and you've forgotten what you typed, there's no need to go worry about changing it. You can just view it there, and it also makes it easier if you were to make a typo or something. So that'll do for now for us here. Again, I'm going to keep this as simple. Taking the scenario, this is for your home, nothing too fancy. There is a lot of configuration, and that's one of the reasons I like MikroTik, is you do have those options, but it's without knowing what you're doing, you can get yourself into some mishaps. So I will have other videos dedicated to the Wi-Fi side of it and how to properly configure Wi-Fi, as well as a more in-depth look in the Capsman. So let's now start with our channel. Now we're going to do, this is effectively going to simulate auto channel. So for 5 gig and 2.4, we'll just call it channel dash 2G. Here we can select all of them because we can apply this to either interface, and stick with AX, always 20 meg for 2.4, and then the frequency, as you can see here, we obviously have quite a wide range. We're limited, obviously it's 2.4, so we're limited to the 2.4 spectrum. And for this, you need to know the actual the frequency in megahertz. So again, there's a link in the description below to another article which basically explains the channels for 2.4 and 5 gig in fairly simple terms. But really, all you need to know, if you copy this, you should be good to go in terms of channels 1, 6, which is that one, and 11. And whether or not you should always use 1, 6, and 11 for 2.4. It's well documented reasons why, but basically you should only ever use 20 megahertz channel, and then that gives you 3 non-overlapping channels. You stick anything in the middle of those, you're just going to cause interference, you're just going to cause problems. So you should always stick to those ones. Okay, and basically what we're going to do when we apply this, it will pick one based from those. If we didn't do that, we just gave it the whole range, it would pick something within the middle. And again, like I mentioned, at home it might not notice it too bad, but you could interfere with your neighbors. So we just stick, that's the best rule to follow. 5 gig, slightly different because we've obviously got a larger spectrum to play with, but again, I always stick to what I call the non-DFS channels. And for this, just to keep things moving, I'm just going to select 5 gig AX. I'll just go for 20 megahertz here, and I'll just select the first 4 20 megahertz channels. So this would be 32, 36, 40, and 44. Again, we could then have the whole range in there if we wanted, which I would also recommend. Or you can select this as basically the bands, the high, the low, but for now we'll just keep it these 4 for now. Okay, that'll do. Right, so now our channels, now we get to our configuration. So we start with config. We'll give it this one for the 2 gig. Mode is an access point, SSID. MikroTik Masters -2G. I always like to separate my frequency SSIDs based on what frequency they are, based on the SSID. I prefer that way than let my devices choose, so you don't end up stuck on a 2.4 congested channel and wonder why you're getting poor performance. Again, these are all configurable, and again I would recommend that you look at that, but again that would be in a more detailed video than this one, so we'll just stick to these simple ones for now. Channel, all we do is to select our channel that we previously did, and same for security. Okay, and now we're just going to make a one now for our 5 gig main access point. Again, give it the same MikroTik Masters -5G. Okay, again, we'll select Australia because that's where I am. Channel 5 gig band. Oh no, what am I doing? I don't need to do that, do I? Because I've already done that in the channel. And then security, same security profile for both. Done. And now, last thing to do is just add that configuration to our. So this is Wi-Fi 1. So as I mentioned, this is 5 gig. We can actually rename these just for give ourselves some 5G and 2G. There we go. And then last thing, we can just enable them. There we go. And you can see these are the channels it's picked. So for my 5 gig it's picked 44. For 2.4 it's picked 11. Operate on AX. Again, if you want to understand the difference between G and AC, AX, A, then again check out the link in the description. It's just for my own sanity. I like to. There we go, for neatness. Okay. Cool. Good stuff. So these are slave interfaces. I'm surprised they haven't changed that term yet, but who knows, they probably will. The master and bound basically shows it's operational. We have already added them to our bridge. As you can see, it's updated the name for us there. And now we should see them. Oh, this realizes, yeah, the machine I'm on doesn't have Wi-Fi, so I can't actually check if they're on there. We will try and attempt to connect a device once I get the internet working, and we'll be good to go. Okay, so that should be everything done now. What I'm going to go and do is connect the internet, and then we'll just test our connectivity. Okay, so what I've done is I've just removed that gateway I had off the interface that I'm accessing this machine from. So now the internet access, it shouldn't be able to route out that interface anymore. I've connected the R1 interface, so Ether 1, to the dev network, which is actually the same network which I'm accessing the remote device through anyway. If we go to addresses, we can see we've picked up .6 as our dynamic. It would be our WAN IP. So if that was connected to your ISP, that could be it might be a CGNAT IP address, or it could be a public IP address. Again, there's multiple ways. Certainly here in Australia, what we have NBN, sometimes requires a VLAN ID, sometimes PPPoE, or sometimes it's just a straight connection from the provider, Ethernet provider connection. So, but again, I didn't want to get bogged down in the ways of connection in this video, just to keep things a bit simpler. So now, technically, we should be getting an IP address from our. Let's go to our DHCP server. Just check we've got a lease. Yeah, so this is the machine I'm on, Luigi. We've got an IP here 200. If we open up command prompt and do ipconfig, there we go. So as you can see, I removed that gateway there, so I can't route out that way. But this is my connection to the MikroTik. I do /all. You can see my DNS server is also going to be that. So firstly, let's just do the old DNS lookup against. Okay, so we can resolve DNS. So if we can ping out to the internet, which we can, and let's do a trace route as well, just for fun. So there we go. So we go to our MikroTik. That goes then onto the development router, which then goes onto the ISP and out to the internet. So there we go. We are online. We will just do the Wi-Fi check as well. So I'll just grab my mobile phone and look for networks. There it is. 5G. We just load the registration table, see if we can connect. Hello world. 1, 2, 3. Connect. Okay, it's not connecting. Let's change. Oh, there we go. Hang on. Sorry, should have used CCMP, not 256. There we go. See if that makes a difference. There we go, connected. See, I'm on that SSID. There's my MAC address. And there we go. There's my phone, Android phone, and my IP address. So there we have it. A simple setup for your home with a MikroTik. And now, once you've got this done, there's the rest of the world to conquer. So there's we can do more elaborate things. We can run VPN servers. You can run scripts. You can monitor devices from this machine. You can do traffic shaping. We can do load balancing. We can have multiple WAN interfaces and have prioritization. So hopefully cover off a lot of these things in upcoming videos, as well as guides and tutorials on the website. If you have any specific issues, or you've got this far and you've decided you want to try something else and it doesn't work, or you don't know how to do something in particular, then feel free to leave a comment, or on the website leave a comment, or contact me directly via there. And any feedback is welcome. But if not, I'll see you on the next one. Thanks.